Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, a survival guide for lovers, family, and friends. I'm also the author of Twin Flame Romance, The Journey to Unconditional Love. All of my books are available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible books. If you're new to my channel, welcome! Thank you for subscribing below. Click on that bell, scroll up to all for all notifications, and thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I do readings, 30, 60, and 90-minute readings, Twin Flame Romance, Life, Path, and Purpose. You can book that at my website, michellefondinauthor.com. Welcome to Removing Obstacle Thursdays. Today we are talking about twin flames and addiction, part 1 of a 3-part series that I'm going to publish for the next 3 Thursdays, including today. This is an especially important topic that is near and dear to my own heart. Not that in my twin flame situation there is addiction, but in my previous soulmate relationship, which I do talk about in both of these books right here. It was a soulmate connection, and I was in a relationship with an alcoholic for 5.5 years. That truly did affect me. It led me to doing a lot of research about addiction and recovery, spending a lot of time in AA meetings, NA meetings, even meetings in detox with my person at the time, as well as interviewing over 10 alcoholics in long-term recovery to get their stories about what it takes to recover from an addiction. So I'm very passionate about this topic. The reason why I presented this topic for this time period is that I kept getting emails from viewers just like you who were in desperate situations with someone who is drinking that they really love, someone who uses drugs that they really, really love. And of course, there are other types of addiction as well. We're really going to focus more on chemical dependency, but I want to mention in this video that there are other types of dependencies as well. Now, alcoholism, the traditional alcoholism, is now called alcohol use disorder, and a drug addiction, again, drug use disorder. They have shied away from things like alcoholism as it tends to have some sort of stigma. And in fact, as I was preparing to do this mini series, I stumbled upon the Science of Addiction that Time magazine just put out. And now apparently it's a republication of this magazine that was repurposed and republished for this season after the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, which really exacerbated this subject surrounding addiction. Now, to begin, I'm just going to give you guys a few statistics because today we are really talking about diagnosing the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction, and of course other addictions as well. But let's just look at a few statistics just to help you really understand. The first one comes from a poll on my YouTube community page in which over 250 viewers responded to this poll when I asked if you or your twin flame, divine masculine or divine feminine, suffers from an addiction, and if so, which type of addiction? And in that poll, over 55% of you responded that yes, either you or your twin flame suffers from some sort of addiction. 17% said they didn't know because they simply did not have enough time with their twin flame counterpart, and 22% responded no. Now, if you look at that statistic alone, 55%, that is an enormous percentage. That is well over half. That means 1 out of every 2 twin flames suffers from addiction. And that is either one or both. And you might be asking the reasons why. Why is it that so many twin flames suffer from addiction? I'm going to get to that. But first, I just want to give you some statistics. Now, these statistics are from the USA. I know many of you, thank you so much for watching my channel, come from all over the world, but addiction is not a country problem. It's not a continent problem, it is a worldly problem. So while I may focus in on statistics specifically for the US, just know that addiction is a human problem. So the first statistic I really want to give to you is that more than 20 million Americans over the age of 12 in 2019 had a substance use disorder. Among Americans with mental health disorders, 9.5 million also have a substance use disorder. In the 12 months, so we're just talking about pandemic-wise, right? In the 12 months prior to May of 2020, more than 81,000 Americans died of a drug overdose. So those are just a few statistics that have to do with chemical dependency and chemical addiction. So let's go back and define what is addiction. So the classic textbook definition of addiction is a chronic relapsing behavior in the face of negative consequences, the overwhelming urge to continue something you know is bad for you. And my definition is addiction is never getting enough of what you do not need. The American Medical Association, I know there is this debate about alcoholism, alcohol use disorder, and some people are still under the impression that it is a moral failing. However, in 1956, the American Medical Association classified alcohol and drug addiction as an actual disease because of the classification of disease in that it follows a certain set of symptoms and a certain set of patterns. Now, I'm going to go into finer detail on this. And I want to say to you, if you are intrigued about this and you have a question in your mind as to whether or not you or your twin flame or just a loved one in general suffers from a chemical substance use disorder, I'm putting 2 links in the information box below this video linked to quizzes that you can take to determine whether or not you have an addiction to some sort of chemicals such as drugs, alcohol, or prescription pills. So the question remains is, why are twin flames in this collective so enormously affected by addiction? This is huge, guys. Over 55% of all twin flames in this collective suffer from an addiction. And what I want to say to you is very heartfelt and very true. And it's something that I preach and teach in all of my twin flame videos on some level. As twin flames, we are spiritually awakened to a spiritual journey. So when we are activated through our heart chakra and through the activation of having met our twin flame counterpart, or we are encountering upon this spiritual journey that is activated within our soul code or our soul's purpose or something that is found in our Akashic record, right? Our soul signed up to do this on this journey in this lifetime. When we are activated into this journey, we commence a spiritual journey. And a part of commencing this spiritual journey that may well have started decades before you were activated by your twin flame counterpart, you embark upon this spiritual journey. And as a result of that, you are a reflection of the imperfections of humanity. And because you are a deep reflection of the imperfections of humanity, and that as a twin flame on this spiritual journey, you are called to action to heal those aspects of humanity that are suffering, it stands to reason that addiction, as it is such a humongous part of what is ailing humanity as a whole, that this one hurt in particular rises to the top of the problems that twin flames are encountering. And that is the main reason why we see so many twin flames in addiction or in a counterpart relationship with a twin flame who has an addiction. So one thing that I do want to say to you before we really dive deeply into this is that it is not your fault. Addiction is a disease, and it is classified as a disease. It is a multifaceted disease. That's why it is so baffling, and that is why recovery is so challenging. And in the subsequent videos, we're really going to speak about recovery for yourself if you are in addiction. And we are also going to speak about recovery for yourself if it's not you that has an addiction, but it is your twin flame counterpart who suffers from that addiction. So we're really going to hone in and focus on that as well. But the one thing I wanted to tell you is that addiction is so multifaceted. It is a physical disease, it's a psychological disease, it is a mental disease, and it is a spiritual disease. It hits a person on all levels. And one thing that I did forget to mention, it is a disease of relationship. Addiction cannot survive without relationship. So it truly is a disease of relationship in addition to all of the other categories that I mentioned. You might be wondering, why is addiction a disease of relationship? The reason that it's a disease of relationship is because chemical dependency, so alcohol and drug addiction, is chronic, progressive, and fatal. Now, the thing about it being chronic is that it is ongoing. So you might hear of people, maybe a loved one who, for example, might pull back from drinking or drugging for a little bit and say that they're cured, but then a special weekend comes up, a holiday comes up, the Super Bowl comes up, and pretty soon, before you know it, they are binge drinking again, and they are on a downward spiral when they had convinced themselves and they had convinced you that they are cured. The disease is progressive. What does progressive mean? Progressive means that over time, it will only get worse. And that is the general rule for all chemical addictions. And fatal, if untreated, alcoholism and drug addiction is 100% fatal. Most untreated alcoholics or drug addicts will die of an overdose or will die of some disease related to the drinking or drugging. So chronic, progressive, and fatal, those are the three key components to any chemical addiction. So multifaceted and relationship-based. The reason why it's relationship-based is that every alcoholic or drug addict has on average 8 people in their lives who are enabling them. And what does enabling mean? Enabling means that usually the addict is so wrapped up in their addiction, and this could be for like a gaming addiction, a pornography addiction, a food addiction, or a sex addiction even. So even though those are not chemical related, meaning you're not ingesting something, well, food's actually a chemical addiction, but food has not yet been classified by the American Medical Association as an actual addiction. When we look at addiction, there are at least 8 people who are involved somehow in the addict's life under some umbrella. They don't all have to be family members. They don't all have to be friends. They could be the local bartender who is overpouring liquor for them, for example, in exchange for a bigger tip. It could be a friend who's keeping the drugs at their house for them so that their wife, kids, mother, father, sister, brother does not find it. It could be the friend that is constantly bailing them out of jail when they get arrested for a DUI or DWI. So there are always 8 enablers who are making it easier for the addict to continue the addiction. Oftentimes, it's not until everybody stops enabling the addict that they really hit rock bottom, and that then too, they can move toward recovery. Alcoholism, drug addiction, chemical dependency is a spiritual disease. Now, let me explain to you what that means about it being a spiritual disease. It means that the addict truly believes that they are alone. Now, this comes on several levels from several different places in their lives, and it typically comes up from some kind of void that these needs that were unmet in childhood. So that's one part of it. There's always this nature versus nurture debate, and chemical dependency has both, actually. As a result of having these unmet needs over time, the alcoholic or drug addict has a tendency to develop these personality traits of self-preservation. And because they develop these personality traits of self-preservation, they tend to isolate a lot. And so there is this sense around them that says, I am alone, I need to depend on myself, I can't really depend on anybody else, but if I do depend on other people, I need to manipulate them so that they work things out for me. And that's usually how it goes with an addict, that they are very, very good at manipulating other people through their exuberant personality. Addicts have amazing personalities. I've always been attracted, after being with my alcoholic person, I'm generally very attracted to addicts because of their amazing personality. And they develop these very charismatic and enthusiastic and amazing personalities. And it's something they probably had before, but it's something they've developed because they are very good manipulators and they need to get their addiction needs met. And so they tend to have people gravitate toward them a lot in order to get those addiction needs met. But there are personality flaws that include lying, deception, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality change. So there are a lot of those personality flaws. It's like impulse control is actually another one of those, that they have a hard time saying no or saying no to themselves. So those are the personality traits that addicts tend to have, among others, which are all listed in my book, Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic. Now, of course, my book is focused on alcohol as the drug of choice, but any other type of chemical dependency works exactly the same way. The next piece of it is something that is genetic and physical, so brain related, and meaning that the amygdala, which is the very primitive reptilian part of the brain, that is responsible for the pleasure response. So addicts have a tendency to have an overactive amygdala and an underactive prefrontal cortex, which is higher thinking. And just to give you an example, the prefrontal cortex is developed in things such as prayer and meditation and higher level thinking. So they have an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex and an overdeveloped amygdala, which has the sense of survival, and food and sex are very pleasurable to us and they help the species to survive. Therefore, those very natural instincts of having pleasure is something that we are actually hardwired to do. And when you ingest drugs and alcohol or other chemicals such as pills, opioids, what happens is that amygdala is lit up, and the dopamine receptors tend to flood the brain with dopamine, and then the gamma receptors, which actually stop pleasure, in order to not overload the system, they're blocked. And so what happens chemically to an addict is that they get overloaded with this dopamine. They have this rush of dopamine, and actually women who are addicts have an even greater rush of dopamine than men. Therefore, they need lesser of the drug or alcohol in order to have the same effect. But then what happens is they go into withdrawal when the drug or alcohol is taken away, and the dopamine levels drop dramatically, in which you have that more down feeling or lack of pleasure. Many people will go into depression or anxiety because they don't have the high of the dopamine. Now, dopamine is just one of the neurochemicals that is released during addictive use of a substance or just use of a substance. There are others, such as the serotonin levels in your body, right? The oxytocin as well. When we look at the physical aspect, there are also signs through CAT scans and PET scans that show that an addict's brain is actually hardwired just slightly differently than someone who doesn't generally become addicted. Now, overuse can make anyone addicted, but there are predispositions on a physical level that help someone to become addicted. I mentioned the spiritual level, and I really want to cycle back to that. Alcohol and drugs dissolve boundaries. And what does that mean? That means that we are all looking for a higher sense of purpose in life, even though we may not be fully aware that we are looking for a higher sense of purpose. So if you are a frequent meditator, for example, you meditate daily, you know what it is like to slip into the gap and to have the pleasure feelings of joy as you align and as you are connected to universal consciousness. However, there are people who want to release themselves from their body in order to experience the pleasure of oneness, the pleasure of immersion into universal consciousness, but who don't know how to do it because they're trying to escape the pain of their actual life. And so they will use drugs or alcohol as a means to dissolve boundaries. But it's a very artificial means of dissolving boundaries, so that when you try to dissolve boundaries into the spiritual by artificial means of drugs or alcohol, when you come back down from the high, you are actually much lower than when you started. What this means is something that was explained to me by Dr. Deepak Chopra, with whom I worked and learned from through the Chopra Center. And he explained it was kind of like a karmic debt that needs to be repaid in a way. So for example, if you dissolve the boundaries, trying to immerse yourself with the divine by artificial means through alcohol or drugs, and you experience the oneness, A, you're not ready for it typically, and B, you're trying to bypass all of the stages that you need to go through in order to attain the oneness. And so what happens is you attain the oneness, sure, when you're high or drunk or on drugs. But when you come back down, now you are in a deficit. There are even more things that you need to work through in order to naturally attain the state of oneness. Another thing on the spiritual side that addicts have a really hard time with is feeling at one, at peace, not only with the divine, but with their own bodies. Addicts happen to be very, very, very disconnected from their actual physical bodies. And again, it's that desire to transcend pain in order to seek pleasure. And if you are disconnected from your actual body, it somehow numbs the effect of the pain so that you can forget that you actually have a human body. It's a very bizarre thing. But most addicts are extremely disconnected from their own bodies, even though talking to an addict, they would actually deny that that is true when it is in fact true. So, and you'll see that when we go over the signs and symptoms of alcohol and drug dependency. And I believe now might be a good time to do that. Sign number one is craving drinking regularly. And to that, I want to add someone who is addicted to alcohol or drugs. And we're going to use drinking as the parameter. Now, I know some of you who use marijuana or cannabis or whatever it's termed, because I am not in that community. So I do not know exactly what the proper terms are, the proper terminology is. But let's just say marijuana use, which I guess encompasses all of that type of plant. Many people are under the false belief that you cannot be addicted to marijuana because marijuana is a non-addictive substance. Nothing could be further from the truth. I actually consulted with the National Institute on Drug Abuse in an article published in 2020 that says 30% of all marijuana users suffer from marijuana use disorder or an addiction to marijuana. So the signs and symptoms of dependency on marijuana are exactly the same as alcohol dependency or drug dependency or pill or opioid dependency, just depending on what the actual substance is. And really, you got to keep in mind that if it gets in the way of normal living, of normal productivity in life, if it gets in the way of your relationships, if it gets in the way of your job, if it gets in the way of you taking care of yourself, taking care of your body, mind, soul, and spirit, then it is a problem, right? So we're going to go back to the drinking, and it's someone who craves drinking regularly. Often it will transition from social drinking to drinking alone. Drinking alone by itself is actually a sign of alcohol dependency if you have other signs with it. But generally speaking, people who drink alone have a tendency toward alcohol use disorder. So the second thing I wanted to say about drinking regularly and craving drinking regularly is as alcohol dependency, and again, you can replace the drug of choice for this as well. As alcohol dependency increases, because remember, the disease is progressive, alcoholics will typically not only isolate themselves in order to drink, but they will begin to hide drinks in various places. Some will hide them in their car, some will hide them in the bathroom, some will hide them in the laundry room, but they will start to hide them. The next thing is they will start to pre-game. What does that mean? Is that alcohol-dependent people or drug-dependent people do not like it when other people make comments about their addiction or maybe speculating about their addiction. So they will begin to pre-game. What does that mean? It means that prior to attending an event or a family function or a dinner with somebody, they will actually drink a few drinks ahead of time or more in order to make it appear that they're not drinking when they are present at the event. So it's very calculated in order to cater to the addiction. Then they can say to somebody who might be suspicious that they are drinking too much, and they say, no, look, don't you see, I'm only having a drink with dinner, when prior to dinner, they drank 5 shots. It's extremely common for alcohol addicted people to do that, or drug addicted people to do that. So they will pre-game, they will hide the alcohol, they will go from social to drinking alone. Now that doesn't mean that they're not also drinking socially, but they will drink alone. And they crave the alcohol over anything else. Again, as the disease progresses, in addition to that, they will start refusing to go to places that do not serve alcohol. So if there's a place where you need to go to and there's no alcohol present or alcohol is forbidden in a venue, then they will start to refuse to attend a venue that does not serve alcohol or where alcohol cannot be present. And that is actually very much a telltale sign that they are addicted. Now, the next one I really like, it's being unable to stop or to limit drinking. So let me please just listen to this, and you need to actually take this to heart. A person who does not have an alcohol addiction problem, or a person who does not have a drug problem, doesn't have to try to stop. Okay? I just need you to hear that. A person who does not have a problem never needs to try to stop because they don't have a problem. So for example, if you are planning on going out to a fancy restaurant in a 7-course meal and you do not have an alcohol problem, You don't have to plan ahead and think about, okay, well, I'll have a before dinner drink and I might have an after dinner drink, but I'm not going to drink any wine during dinner. That doesn't even occur to you. It doesn't even come to your mind because you don't have a problem. You will see the alcoholic in that same scenario start to plan ahead. They'll start to be thinking about it. They'll start to calculate and think about where they can get their drinks in and where they might need to stop having the drinks. You also see them, for example, make bargains and start to agree with themselves or not agree with themselves or agree with other people or make bargains with other people about certain times of the day. So they might say, okay, you think I have a problem? I'll prove to you that I don't have a problem. I won't start drinking until after 5 p.m. Or I will only drink on the weekends. So you see, people that do not have a drug dependency or an alcohol dependency do not need to do that because they don't have the dependency. So they don't need to calculate the times. They just don't do it, right? Another thing that they will try to do, which is a bona fide lie, is they will try to switch alcohols. So alcohol is alcohol is alcohol is alcohol. If you're an alcoholic, if you are alcohol dependent, it doesn't matter which alcohol you take. Alcohol is the thing causing the dependency and your personality flaws and the chemistry in your body. It's not the type of alcohol. That is a total fallacy, and it's a lie that most alcoholics put forth. A lot of chemically dependent people will say, oh, well, in that case, I'll just switch. So you will often see them switch from hard liquor to beer to wine, or wine to beer, or beer to wine or hard liquor. You will often see them try to switch to something like marijuana. You will often see them try to switch to something like, believe me, this is a thing, and I know some of you know this, to like ground up Adderall, to like snort Adderall, or they might switch to cocaine. They constantly are trying to switch around the addiction to make it not look like an addiction. But rest assured, if you see a person who is switching around the substances to try to prove that they're not addicted, you can be pretty darn certain that they are indeed addicted. You will see them needing greater amounts of alcohol or the drug to get the same effect. And in fact, alcoholics who progress in their alcoholism, they will eventually only drink hard liquor. Socially, when they're out, they might sip a beer, and you might see them sipping a beer over an hour or 2 hours of the exact same beer. But rest assured, prior to drinking that beer, they've probably downed a fifth of vodka because they need so much alcohol to give them the same effect, and that they just need it prior to being in that social situation. So while you're sitting there thinking like, oh, they're just sipping that beer for like 3 hours, they've downed a fifth of vodka prior to that. But it's always the hard liquor because it's going to give them the same effect in smaller quantities. You will see alcoholics giving up activities due to a hangover, or giving up activities that they really normally like to hang out and drink more. So let's say if you were out to dinner with your alcoholic boyfriend, alcoholic girlfriend, and then you were like, oh, well, let's go bowling. Like a bunch of my friends and we're gonna go bowling. They will usually want to stay at the bar and just continue to drink and not play the game, for example. But you will also see them canceling morning activities because they are hungover, and even if they say they're not hungover, the telltale signs is they will be vomiting, they will refuse to eat, they will be really grumpy and really tired, and they will have jitters, they will be extremely anxious, they might fly off the handle, and that's because they are going through alcohol or drug withdrawal in the morning. Another indication is that they will continue to drink even after severe consequences. So severe consequences, what are they? They have health problems. And so even though they have health problems, they will still continue to drink. And the other thing are problems with the law. A lot of them will have actual problems with the law, DUIs, DWIs, being belligerent in public or fighting in public. And so you will see them continue to drink even after those severe consequences with the law, or severe consequences with their health or with their families. And so that is another indication of alcohol dependency. I'm also going to put the link above here right now to 14 signs of a high functioning alcoholic that you can actually check out. And some of these signs do overlap, but there probably are ones that I forgot in this video that you can check out at that link above. So let's go through withdrawal symptoms, and we're gonna wrap this video up with withdrawal symptoms and then just talk a little bit about how you can actually recognize. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about like talking to your person about alcohol dependency, drug dependency, or another type of addiction. So let's go through withdrawal symptoms, and then we're going to wrap up this video. So withdrawal symptoms, and don't let them fool you, because many alcoholic or drug dependent people will say that they do not get hangovers, that they do not have withdrawal symptoms. But rest assured, a lot of withdrawal symptoms don't look quite like what you think or believe. Most of them will have vomiting the next day, especially if they have alcohol dependency. The other thing is that you will notice is that they will not eat food while they are drinking, because food dilutes the effects of the alcohol. They won't drink water typically because water dilutes the effects of the alcohol, and the alcoholic is going for the effect. But the next day, or when they temporarily withdraw from the alcohol or drugs, they will get the jitters, they will get the shakes, they will have extreme anxiety. Of course, I already mentioned the digestive disturbances like vomiting and diarrhea, because the body is trying to purge from the drinking or drugging. There's profuse sweating usually is a sign of withdrawal. Depression, insomnia, and fatigue, confusion and hallucinations, and seizures. And seizures is actually like one of the more dangerous signs, and someone needs to go immediately to the emergency room. The other one are delirium tremens, is when they're very disoriented, and it usually is coupled with a seizure. And I would say if that is a sign, take your person to the hospital, because they need immediate treatment because they're going through severe withdrawal symptoms. And it's actually the withdrawal symptoms that causes the addict to reuse, because they're trying to seek relief from the withdrawal symptoms themselves. Now let's talk about a couple of things. What I really want you to get clear on as we move through this series is addiction is something that needs to be treated. And the second thing is switched addiction is still addiction. So there are two things to that. First of all, addiction needs to be treated. We're going to talk about that in subsequent videos. Switched addiction is still addiction, is that if a person is healing from a chemical addiction, for example, and then moves the behavior over to gambling, is it less harmful to their health? Probably. But is gambling as an addiction still an addiction? Yes, it's still an addiction. Therefore, the addiction is not cured, because the addiction or the underlying causes that cause the addiction are actually what need to be treated to arrest the progress and the symptoms of the addiction itself. Now, one thing that I want to say is that there is something called coexisting conditions, coexisting or comorbid addictions, in which a person will suffer from an alcohol and drug addiction, which is typically the case, because an alcoholic will be looking for constant sources of higher pleasure principle substances that will help them to get the same effect as the disease progresses. So a lot of times drinking and drugging are very much combined, but often you will see a lot of other risky behavior as well. So for example, a drug and alcohol addicted person will also have a sex addiction, or also have a gaming addiction, or also have a gambling addiction. So oftentimes these addictions will come together as co-addictions. And in addition to that, there are coexisting disorders, which, for example, someone who has panic or generalized anxiety disorder is highly likely to also have an addiction to a substance. Someone who suffers from depression is also highly likely to have a substance use disorder. So as you can see, there's a lot having to do with the realm of addiction that is not unique to one specific thing or one specific substance. Lastly, what I want to say to you is that denial is the biggest thing in addiction, is that most people who are addicted to a substance or even to a thing like gaming, sex, gambling, porn, denial comes as part and parcel of the package. So a person flat out denying that they are not addicted is a response, and it's not the actual truth. So the actual truth can be found out by observing all the signs and symptoms that we talked about in this video, going to the links below to take a test on, for example, alcohol or drug dependency, and seeing if it's actually an issue or problem for you or this person. And then looking into it further in order to be the detective, you want to be the detective in this, to really start to see the truth. Because one thing about a person who is addicted and the patterns of behavior that they have developed over time is that they are extremely convincing at trying to convince you that they don't have a problem. Again, the denial, the convincing, the manipulation is just part and parcel of the entire enchilada. And it's designed to actually protect the addiction. It sounds really crazy, right? But I really do talk about it a lot more in my book, Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, as to why, the why of the protection mechanism for the addiction itself. So I hope this was helpful. Please stay tuned on the next 2 Thursdays to get more information on twin flames and addiction. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for subscribing to my channel below. Click on that bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this video with other twin flames and other people who you know who may be suffering from an addiction or a loved one. And thank you so much for your support of this channel. You can buy a book or 2 or 3. You can join a boot camp. You can pledge your support on Patreon, www.patreon.com/Michelle S. Fondin. And I will see you in the next video.